Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on some of history's most sensational, most gruesome stories. But what if the tales we all know of forced labor, brutal infanticide, and imperial madness aren't exactly the whole truth? I mean, think about it. What if the version of history that we all learned, the one that's so dramatic and visceral, is actually more fiction than fact? What if the real story is something else entirely? And, maybe even more fascinating. So let's start with maybe the most iconic image from the ancient world, the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. The sheer scale is just mind-boggling, right? But the story of how they were built, well, that's our first great historical myth. We have all seen this in movies. You can picture right now a massive enslaved workforce toiling under the brutal Egyptian sun, pushed to their absolute limits by cruel overseers. It's this powerful, grim image of human suffering, but it's almost completely wrong. The reality is actually so much more interesting. The primary workforce, they weren't slaves at all. Nope, they were conscripted citizens, mostly farmers who were basically doing their civic duty. It was less like slavery and way more like a form of taxation that you paid with your labor, especially when the Nile flowed every year and you couldn't farm anyway. And we know this because of some pretty hard evidence. Archaeologists have literally dug up entire villages that were built just for these workers. And what they find? They found proof of a high-quality diet. We're talking plenty of meat and bread. You just can't move giant blocks of stone if you're starving. But get this is the most incredible part. We have written records from 1170 BC of the first ever documented labor strike in history. Artisans put down their tools, they marched on local temples, and they demanded the food rations they were owed. And you know what? They got them. This wasn't some powerless, enslaved mob. This was an organized workforce that knew their rights. Okay, so now let's travel from the sands of Egypt to the legendary city-state of Sparta, a place known for its absolutely fierce warriors and brutal discipline, which has a particularly dark legend right at the heart of its story. This is that chilling tale told by the Roman historian Plutarch. The idea that an entire society practiced systematic infanticide, just casting away any baby they deemed unfit, that has defined our image of Spartan cruelty for centuries. It's like the ultimate example of their ruthless pursuit of perfection. But here's a number that you really need to know. 600. That is how many years passed between the height of Spartan power and when Plutarch actually wrote this story down. That's kind of like someone today writing a first-hand history of medieval Europe based on nothing but rumors. And when you look for evidence, the case against this myth is just overwhelming. First off, Plutarch is the only source we have for this claim. And even more important, extensive archaeological digs all around the supposed site, they've turned up adult remains, sure, but not a single infant skeleton, not one. So what was the story? Almost certainly it was propaganda. It was a sensational rumor, probably started by rivals, that got written down centuries later and somehow solidified into fact. All right, for our final myth, we are heading to the heart of the Roman Empire and one of its most infamous emperors, who, it turns out, was facing a truly epic public relations crisis. The image is just iconic, isn't it? The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, and there's the supposedly deranged Emperor Nero, perched on a balcony, gleefully playing his fiddle, basically celebrating the destruction. It's become the ultimate portrait of a tyrant who's completely lost his mind. But the historical timeline, recorded by the historian Tacitus, tells a totally different story. The fire started in a crowded commercial area, basically a tinderbox just waiting for a spark. And where was Nero? He wasn't even in Rome. He was miles away in the coastal town of Antium. When he heard the news, he raced back, and far from celebrating, he organized massive relief efforts, using his own money and opening his private gardens to house the homeless. The rumors? Yeah, those were started by his political enemies. And then there are the little details that just completely fall apart when you look at them. First, the fiddle, it hadn't been invented yet. It wouldn't even exist for another 900 years. There's also zero evidence that he started the fire. So what's the more likely source of this myth? Propaganda. Nero infamously blamed the Christians for the fire, which led to their brutal persecution. So it's highly probable this story was created as counter-propaganda, a way to forever cement Nero's legacy as an absolute monster. So, from Egypt to Sparta to Rome, you start to see a clear pattern emerging here. And these stories, they force us to ask a really fundamental question about how we even understand the past. Here's the crucial takeaway from all this. History is never just a list of facts. It's a narrative. It's a story told by someone. And the person telling that story, whether it's a rival politician, a historian writing 600 years later, or a group that's being persecuted, they have a motive. Their biases and just the simple passage of time can transform a complex reality into a simple, sensational myth. And that leaves us with one final, kind of provocative thought. When you look at the sheer volume of information and misinformation and propaganda being created today, what facts from our own time are going to be misinterpreted? What stories will future historians tell about us? And how much of it really will be true?